Good evening, everybody. Welcome to another session of hashtag Gather to Grow, the first one for 2023. My name is Dawn Numdu. I am your host for tonight on hashtag Gather to Grow with Food for Mzansi. We are talking 2023 trends in Mzansi, and I'd like to start with an introduction of my speakers tonight. I'd like to thank them for being here with us. I know some people are still going from holiday into work mode, or some of you have actually started working already, or maybe you didn't even take a break. But we're happy that you're here and able to share some of your thoughts and insights on tonight's topics. I'm going to start off with food for thought, the duo. Karabo and Kanse, are you both on one link, I'm assuming, because you come as a pair. So welcome to tonight's session. Maybe just an introduction for those that might not know you. So happy to have you with me on the first session for 2023. Happy New Year, by the way.
Thank you so much, Dawn. And thank you, everybody that is actually on this space. And Happy New Year to everybody. My name is Konsi Moraba. I am one part of the Agri duo. Unfortunately, today it's just me, Dawn. Karabo is still on holiday, so I'll be representing the duo. I'm an agricultural economist. And I also have a YouTube channel with Karabo called Food for Thought with Karabo and Konsi, where we just do agri conversations reflecting all the macroeconomic conditions that are affecting agriculture and how agriculture is impacting each and every one of us. So if you ever are interested, go check out our YouTube channel or go on our Instagram and our Twitter, and you'll find all our links there. It's at Konsi Moraba and at the Agri Duo.
Always a pleasure having you join me, Kanse, and I'm actually a little bit jealous of Karabo, who still gets to be on holiday, because I had to drag myself out of the holiday mode and get ready and be part of tonight's session, but I'm so happy to have you with me, and thank you so much. And I'm already following in all of his platforms, and I can't wait to see what you guys are going to be doing for the new year. My next guest is Lunathi Hlakanyane. He's also an agricultural economist. I'm going to allow him just to tell us a little bit about himself, what he does in the industry, who he's working with, and just more about you, Lunathi. The floor is yours.
Thanks, Don. Happy New Year to everyone. My name is Lunathi Hlakanyane. I am an agricultural economist by training. So I work with a company called IQ Business. IQ Business is a consultancy firm. It's a tech consultancy firm, which is something I'm quite interested in. I am also an agri-tech co-founder of a tech startup called Abelusi. Recently, have become a poultry farmer, which has been a very exciting journey. But apart from that, I think a lot of my work is concentrated in agribusiness consulting, where I help farmers conceptualize plans to commercialize their businesses and make them profitable. And I do this mostly through a combination of financial planning models as well as elaborate business plans. I'm also an agricultural writer. I've written quite a lot in the space of agri-tech, agri-business, and obviously all things agricultural futurism. I am a big fan of trends.
Thanks, Lunathi. And wow, how much you've grown. I first connected with you, and it's so happy to see you, changing and moving in the sector. And kudos to being, dipping your hands into the real hardcore business on the ground with the poultry farming. I'm so happy. Yep. And I actually know Abelusi really well. So congrats on that, and all the best with that as well. I think Samkelo was also recently featured on our podcast. Yeah. I'm really happy to be able to connect with you guys. So keep us in the loop on the latest on that as well. Thanks, Lunathi. And then you guys know my other favorite economist, Tabile, is from the NAMC, but I'm not going to say much about him because, things change. He might have something new to add. It's a new year, new things. Tabile, what about yourself for those who might not know you and what's been happening? Did you enjoy your holiday? Are you still on holiday? Am I bothering you?
Hi, Don and everyone. My name is Tabile Ngunjana. I am an agricultural economist with the National Agricultural Marketing Council based in Pretoria. So my work in general is to, follow what is happening within the sector in general. That is from the global space to the region and, of course, within our country, that is a domestic part of things. So in general, myself, I do follow up in terms of the trends in production, the shifts in prices in production, and, of course, what has been the new, developments in terms of technology adoptions. We do from time to time link with countries. So we are part of those folks who are following up with every commodities. Particularly, we are focusing on value chain analysis from the unit that I work for. So we are specifically looking in terms of changes within the value chain in terms of what to add and how to make it better in all the commodities that are within the agricultural sector in South Africa. So
Thank you, Sabile, and we do forgive the background noise, so no need to apologize. Maybe once you are in a more stable in network area, I'll allow you this
Yeah.
space to share your thoughts on the different topics. But thanks, Sabile. Thank you so much for making time to always talk to us. Now, Lunati, I think I'm going to kick off with you because you actually featured on Food for Mzansi, mentioning that citrus, poultry, and cannabis are the low-hanging fruits within reach for Mzansi's farmers. And this is definitely something that they should be considering or pursuing if they are not focused on these specific commodities, and that you have now sort of highlighted as trends, into 2023. It is a new year. Maybe you can just kick us off, in terms of these specific commodities and why you chose them.
I'll start off with poultry. Goes without saying that chicken meat, or rather poultry meat, is by far the most popular meat variant in the country. I think the last time I checked the stats, we were sitting on a per capita consumption of roughly 39.6 kgs. It's edging nearer to 40 kgs. And so that should give you a rough sense of how much chicken is consumed in the country. Chicken production is also keeping pace with this, right? And also responding to it. I saw one stat that referenced that chicken meat production in the country should increase roughly by 2% in 2023 to roughly about 1.6 million tons. And most of this is as a result of stabilizing feed costs, animal health management, economic recovery, as well as increased investment in the industry. Now, the economic recovery part of it might not be clear now, but I do strongly believe, and the data does also corroborate this, that we will begin to see a bit of recovery towards the latter quarters of the year. And so that should ease quite a lot of pressures, especially around feed costs, which tend to make a significantly high ratio of your production costs in poultry production. And of course, if you look at this and you couple it with the fact that the demand, is steadily increasing, poultry production is a no-brainer, right, for anyone who's looking to diversify their farming operations. And one stat actually said that we expect to see roughly over 2.3% increase in demand this year. It's looking quite positive. So I think anyone who's looking into not putting all of their eggs, not to speak, in one basket, I think poultry production is really a good place to start. Regarding cannabis is a very interesting one. Just in the previous year alone, it had an estimated net worth of roughly about 87.8 million rands. And this figure is predicted to grow roughly to about 400 million within the next 3 years. The annual growth rate has also increased quite substantially. I think currently the annual growth rate of cannabis production in the country is about 28.4%. Just to put the numbers on the side, in essence, what this means is that there's a lot of interest in cannabis production. In essence, what it means is that with that interest will come quite a lot of demand, and we're already seeing this coming out of Germany. A lot of German pharmaceutical companies are sourcing their cannabis in South Africa, and it's really not hard to see why. The conditions are right. We've got the right climate conditions. We've got the perfect soil condition to produce cannabis of high quality standards. So there is quite a lot of movement in that regard. And so again, cannabis is one other low-hanging fruit, so to speak, for anyone who's looking to diversify their production. Of course, it is still heavily regulated. And the last time I checked, the regulatory body had issued roughly about 70 odd licenses, right? And the signing up process or the legalization process is still very much painful. But I think anyone who's looking to get into the field, I think they should start looking into applying for a production license. Obviously trying to stay ahead of the curve, because as the data does clearly stipulate, the sector will be huge in the next, let's say, 3 or 4 years. And so with citrus, the word low-hanging fruit might not necessarily be the right phrasing here in this regard, because citrus is a very capital-intensive industry. But I think what's positive for well-established farmers, that is that we in South Africa, we're the second largest citrus producer in the world after Spain. And we account for roughly 60% of all citrus exports that come out of the Southern Hemisphere. So that should tell you something about the value that the international market places on South Africa's citrus industry. Regardless of all the issues that we've had over the past 2 years with incredibly punitive EU restrictions, the sector has grown quite substantially. Just the past year alone, the citrus industry accounted for roughly 25% of the country's total agri exports, right? And this was up from 19% roughly only 3 years ago. And so this should show you, or perhaps give you an indication of how well the sector is doing, and how I think for anyone who wants to basically pursue a much more profitable agricultural enterprise, the citrus sector rather, would really be another great place to start. And so those 3 sectors, Don, are sort of like the 3 agricultural commodities that I think farmers should be looking into.
Thanks, Lunati, and thanks so much for setting the scene for us and giving us, a very detailed overview and why you specifically highlighted these commodities as something for farmers to pursue or even develop, put more money in as they progress or grow in the sector. I see Tapelo is with us as well. Tapelo Piri, thank you so much for being with us. Maybe just an introduction from your side. And I think maybe just the last comment just on what you were also mentioning, Lunati, is that I think we can definitely do another session regarding, EU regulations and also just touching base again with the agro-processing master plan. This is something that we had spoken about when it was, signed off, but I think that a lot has been done since then. So that will definitely be one of the discussions that we have in the future. But maybe just as an introduction, hello, maybe just a bit about you and where you fit into the agricultural space.
Hi, Don. Hi, everyone. I'm a social innovator within the agri space. So most of the things that I'm more passionate about is helping farmers transition from conventional agriculture as we know it to sustainable agriculture with the aim of moving to regenerative agriculture. That's the things that I do within the agri space.
Thanks, Tapelo. And you're always so modest when it comes to your work. But I'd like to just pick your brain more a little bit, just in terms of what farmers have been experiencing, especially with the wet weather and, having to spend more on fertilizer and chemicals as the conversation goes. But maybe I just want to bring, Conce into it and also just focus a little bit more her comments on what Lunati has spoken about and the commodities that he's highlighted for farmers to focus on. And maybe also just more around the agro-processing of these commodities specifically as farmers, turn to it and maybe investing a little bit more in opportunities further along value chain. Conce, over to you.
Thank you, Dawn. I'll just briefly touch on what has been happening in agriculture since 2022. And I don't think we can start without doing a backdrop of where we are as an industry in 2023. And right now we are busy with the summer grain production. And, it is steadfast, it's ongoing despite the weather impacts. We did expect a few declines, especially in maize planted areas, especially in the east. That is in Mpumalanga and the Eastern Free State, because some farmers were not able to plant during the optimal window period. But however, not all is doom. Most of the regions have actually planted their expected intentions as the producers have indicated in October 2022. And the weather prospects are actually supporting the potential of yields and growth in the industry. Just to touch also on what had happened in 2022 and going into 2023 and our outlook for the year. I mean, we had a very challenging year in South African agriculture in 2022 with mild declines in the maize harvest, with the FMD situations. So you can imagine the livestock sector was not doing so well with the beef exports being banned, as well as the sheep wool industry. We are now heading into a new season, and those things will still play a very important role. So I just want us to not disputing what Lou has said, but I know also with the poultry industry, feed costs and input costs have really been high. And I was reading a report that actually says, what are we looking ahead? And they're saying that poultry prices will be supported in 2023 on the backdrop of higher red meat prices, as we are expecting some of the feed prices to decline. But also there, we know that the input prices will still be high. So short-term margins might still be affected in the poultry industry. With the citrus industry very much still a viable, very good industry to be in, but expansion in the export market will remain very critical moving into 2023 and beyond. A lot of our production currently in the market is, the trees are around 5 years to 10 years young. So we will still be expecting more volumes coming in the long term. So we need to expand those export markets. Prices might also be a bit of a challenge now because marketing needs to happen when the time that we are not conflicting with the EU markets, when they are also in that space, because then it becomes very price competitive. And with the port issues and the logistical issues and just the ripple effects of COVID and supply chain constraints that we've experienced since 2021, it becomes a challenge and something to work on when it comes to our exports and our high value crops. With cannabis, not much of an expert. I would like to just let Lou talk about cannabis, but overall activity within the industry remains very strong and resilient. Yeah, we are expecting Still a very good crop in 2022 in terms of the summer grains and the oil seeds. Feed costs are expected to decline as we see better and declining pressure from the international markets. As you know, our local prices follow what is happening internationally, and we've been seeing some downward pressure coming from the Northern Hemisphere. And that actually bodes well also for the consumers, because it means that we will also be receiving our maize meal prices at a lower price. And yeah, I think I've covered the three main crops that Lou spoke about.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks, Conce. And also just an important aspect just to highlight 2022 and the year before that, and how that obviously impacts, where we are at now. So thank you so much just for giving that context as well. Maybe we can just move the conversation around. I think one of the other aspects that Lunati spoke about was around agri-tech solutions and how farmers should be, trying to incorporate this into their business models, and, looking at what is possible for the new year. He spoke about one specific initiative that he's part of, but there are so many other aspects and other initiatives that farmers should be considering or looking at. Maybe we can just move the conversation towards that briefly before we explore, other commodities and crops that we could possibly look at. And then I know that Tapelo specifically wants to focus on what are the options in terms of rising costs and fertilizers, because that's where he, is an expert on, and also more specifically around, changing to more sustainable, renewable farming practices, considering the effects of climate change and the impact on the sector as a whole. But maybe just to stop around agri-tech solutions, and Lunati, maybe you can just speak more about what you meant by this and what farmers should be looking at towards the new year. Thanks.
One of the leading institutional problems or constraints in South Africa's agricultural sector is really around how do you enable equity along the lines of access to high-value markets, equity along the lines of access to funding, access to networks that enable farmers to grow and thrive. And I think agri-tech solutions, and there's quite a number of them in the country that have come out recently, they do an excellent job in terms of enabling or perhaps solving that ask. And I think a very good example of this, and again, I'm going to try to remain as impartial as I can, but I think a very good example of this is an agri-tech solution that I'm personally involved with, Abelusi Livestock Management System, which essentially what it does is that it eliminates one of the cardinal pillars of market failure. That is market information asymmetry. And I think a lot of agri economists that are in the call will be familiar with this, right? Information asymmetry is one of the biggest, if not the biggest, causes of market failure, right? And so through a pricing mechanism that's anchored to an end-to-end data transparency model, farmers are able to, in essence, receive the true value of their livestock. And there are other examples as well. And I think a very good example is Kula, and done quite well in the market. Kula, for those who don't know, is basically an online marketplace for agricultural products. And in essence, they, like Abelusi, they also enable on-demand producer trading and, in essence, enabling farmers to access markets that they ordinarily would not be able to market. There are others like Hello Choice, Agri Cool, which also basically achieve the same objective of connecting farmers with the market in a timely and efficient manner. And by efficient, I mean in a less costly manner. And so I like to refer to agri-tech solutions as Africa's version of the telephone or the landline phenomenon, when the African continent went from not having landlines to jumping straight to having smartphones. And so with agri-tech solutions, I think what we will see going into the future, and I think a lot of this is happening in the country right now, is that we'll see farmers who were previously excluded from certain value chains suddenly supplying markets that are both within the country and outside of the country, markets that previously had very high entry points. And so through their collaboration or their partnership with agri-tech startups, a lot of those barriers will be eliminated. And so it's quite exciting to see these agri-tech startups propping up in the country. Countries like Kenya and Uganda are no stranger to agri-tech solutions. I think one example is M-Pesa, which has done exceedingly well in commercializing farmers in Kenya and Uganda. We had lagged behind slightly in the South African market, but now we are starting to catch up. I think a lot of farmers are increasingly looking for solutions that will accelerate their commercialization journey. And not only that, that will also help them or perhaps enable them to produce efficiently and cost effectively. The main thing that I would advise farmers to perhaps consider incorporating into their operations going into the new year is perhaps signing up to any one of these agri-tech solutions and obviously observing the progress for themselves. And not only that, the value of these solutions is that they help you in streamlining your operations, one, and two, they also help you in accessing markets that you wouldn't necessarily have access to.
Thanks, Lunati. I think that I can agree with you that, more and more farmers are spending time researching it, understanding how they can incorporate it, but it's also different depending on the scale that you're farming and whether you go to an Abalusi or you go to a Kula app, depending on what the need is, that is obviously what you would then make use of, and it will differ from farmer to farmer. Tabile, maybe just your take on this and also just commenting on the fact that Lunati is saying that we were lagging behind it, but there is a sort of upward trend with more farmers considering it and introducing it into their day-to-day practice, and even something that they are starting to consider in the new year.
Thanks, Don. I will, of course, concur with a lot of issues that Lunati has raised. I've been privileged enough to get into a number of countries that are within the continent of Africa specifically, where we were just tracking a couple of things in terms of adopting, new technologies, marketing issues within the farmers and all that. And because, of course, South Africa is kind of different in terms of, we have a commercial sector that tends to overshadow a lot of things that are happening within South Africa. So we tend to overlook some of the key issues that we are not addressing. But from my experience in seeing a number of countries that are within SADC, and in fact, Africa as a continent, I've realized that we as a South African country, we have done so much well in a number of issues, but because we don't communicate them enough in terms of putting them out there so that at least people can be aware of. I think that, of course, goes to what Lunati has said in terms of information sharing, making sure that people get informed information. I think that's something that we have failed to do, communicating some key things that are happening in terms of bid application or so forth. So those are some of the aspects that I think we have failed on. I can say that South Africa as a country is doing well, particularly for if one looks into the farmers that are getting into the sector now. They are relatively informed about a number of issues. They have a bit of background about agriculture, not necessarily practically, but theoretical part of it, which tends to be important if you are to be a farmer these days. I think it is very important that one gets to be informed about a lot of things. So I would say that we as a South African country, we are doing not so bad. I mean, if one is to compare what has happened to a number of countries, I've shared a couple of issues and only today with a couple of stakeholders in South Africa and, of course, some of the neighboring countries where we're engaging about a number of issues that have faced countries. And then one of the key things that those guys, they've asked is how has South Africa managed to, get to be so efficient in terms of, production and adoption of technology and all that. I can say that we are very far compared to a number of countries. We can go as far as South America, where countries you think they are so liberalized, or at least they have quite good sectors. I would say that South Africa is doing pretty well with regards to the technology adoption. But of course, it is not perfect. It can be better. But I think for now, we are not doing very bad. And of course, we're going to always have to be improving a couple of things here and there, particularly for the emerging or smaller farmers, which is always an issue within the South African sector.
Thank you so much, Tabile. And it's always great to sort of get your insights because you're working in so many different areas. Kanse, maybe just to touch on your comments around the grain industry earlier and also just current conditions and outlook, and then specifically also just a bit of an outlook on the table grapes industry and what that will be like, in the new year and where farmers are at the moment, just to move the conversations towards that. Kanse, over to you. Thanks.
So with the table grape market dynamics, our average table grape prices have really shown growth between 2017 up until 2022, and we've only seen a slight dip in prices during the 2020-2021 season, which was mainly in December 2020, and that was just as the marketing season of table grapes was starting. South Africa at that time had just announced a second COVID-19 related lockdown, and then that coincided with numerous lockdowns in other markets overseas, right? Then that disrupted the whole global trade dynamic, which then manifested in reduced container availabilities, as well as longer shipping times. And it affected the arrival time in some foreign markets, and we did lose some markets since then. And as well, quality in South Africa's table grapes was negatively affected, and that translated to lower prices. And these challenges actually continued into the 2021-2022 season. And then they got worse by weather conditions as well as other operational challenges that we have experienced at the Cape Town ports. So as a result, although, your free on board global prices continued on an increasing trend before the COVID-19 pandemic, those higher prices did not necessarily reflect on the farm gate prices of the South African producers due to the quality issues as well as the extended shipping times and other issues that resulted in substantial claim rates and affected the revenue basically on the farms negatively, and some of the other local issues that we have highlighted in the 2022 season. But now it seems that some varieties have actually gotten into the spotlight, that they are more premium varieties. And those are the varieties that producers are actually looking into producing when it comes to table grapes. The Autumn Crisp, the Sweet Globe, and the Sweet Celebration mostly, they outperform other varieties during these conditions. In contrast to these, the exports are actually looking very favorable for those. Now the farmers are actually looking at doing that more than the others. And then another key factor to consider is then the quality and how it has increased production could actually affect the ability of the product to reach the export in good condition. The outlook on the table grapes, though, when we are actually thinking 2023 and beyond, the cost of living pressures in the export market is going to be a huge thing to look at, as it would limit the price growth for our producers. We have higher production as well as export volumes coming from the Southern Hemisphere, and that is increasing the competition in our traditional export markets, and that is bound to put some price pressure on our table grapes commodities. We've seen inflation and the cost of living crisis in the EU as well as the UK, and the purchasing power of the consumer is under pressure. So in terms of price growth, we are not, as analysts, expecting much of a big growth. We are more inclined to see a subdued growth compared to the 2017 to 2022 period. But in terms of supply, although there are shipping disruptions and costs are reducing, and then there's also higher shipping costs compared to pre-pandemic levels. I mean, it's now up to 3 to 5 more expensive. Then the increased cost and the risk associated with the shipping could affect the volumes that will be exported from South Africa to the other exporting markets. And this could, in the medium term, provide some support during the next season in terms of prices, because, supplies will probably be low. So when you consider all of these in the table grapes market, we are expecting a modest price growth of about 2.5% in the coming season. That is what is expected for the table grapes. For the grains, condition reports here that I've recently got a hold of, and like I said earlier in my statement, that we had a lot of rain, like heavy downpours in November, that really impacted Mpumalanga and the Eastern Free State maize growers. And some producers were not able to plant at all during the optimal planting window, that is by mid-November. And other producers had to replant because most of their plants were really damaged. So now that we have gotten more of a clearer view of what's actually happening on the ground, by mid-December, most of the central and the western areas of South Africa, we have seen that soybean plantings have been completed, and some of the maize hectares have been shifted to sunflower plantings, because with sunflower, you can plant it way beyond the optimal planting window of maize. You can plant sunflowers up until early January. So that's one thing that has happened. And then we are only expecting a small percentage of maize to actually move from small hectares of maize to be moved from the original intentions for maize to the other commodities such as sunflower and soybeans. The season is actually looking pretty well. And according to some of the Grain SA statistics, by December, all the summer grains in Mpumalanga had been mainly planted already, except for some soybean lands that were intended for planting that could not be planted due to the wet weather. In KZN, they planted quite a lot in early October, and by the beginning of December, majority of the areas that were intended to be planted on summer grains and oilseeds had been planted. And in the Northwest, we can also see that by the beginning of December, they were already full steam ahead. About 15% of maize was planted in the Northwest, and about 25 to 30% of soybeans were planted, and 5% of the sunflower seeds has also been planted. And then the central and the northern parts of the Free State, they also were able to plant even earlier than what they anticipated. And by December, about 50% of the maize hectares were planted and 80% of the soybean hectares were planted. Like I said, in early December, by mid-November, there was really like a negative outlook on what to expect in terms of the summer grains planting area because of the heavy rains, because the grounds are very wet. The farmers were really, not getting to the grounds and planting on time. But also what we have realized is that South African producers are actually quite efficient. And within 2 weeks, by just getting the good enough sunshine exposure that they had for the first 2 weeks of December, they were able to actually make up for it and actually put some seeds into the ground. So overall, I think we might make the intended planting that was originally estimated in October by the Crop Estimates Committee. And there's going to be decline, might be in the white maize and just shifted to another commodity. But we are expecting another good season for South Africa's summer grain seed crops.
Thank you so much, Conte, and it's always great to get insight from you. And thank you so much for going into so much detail with that. We do have some of our listeners wanting to engage. I see Tamsin, your comments, your questions to our experts here tonight.
Good evening, everybody. And someone asked earlier, when do we stop saying Happy New Year? But I'm just going to say Happy New Year. And I hope everybody had an amazing festive season and hopefully everybody got some rest. Everybody shared such amazing insights. And one thing that we've been dealing with, because we went into the buying space now, because we launched a market platform from Crystal Consulting, is the negative effect that the hail had on so many people's crops. For example, we used to buy lettuce from 2 big commercial farmers and they were hit with hail and we couldn't buy at all because we had dropped in the bucket. And I must say the weather has affected a lot of the farmers that we currently dealing with because they're mostly smallholder farmers very negatively. One of my farmers in Brits lost a whole spinach crop. So some of these things have been very devastating. But what everybody's been saying, and I think everybody has highlighted the exports, the cost that goes with that, because we've ventured into the space where we've partnered with a financier to kind of look at funding some of these smallholder farmers because a lot of farmers suffered damage. For example, in the big spending period where retailers were supposed to buy a lot and were buying a lot, these smallholder farmers couldn't participate because a lot of their crops got damaged. When they had standing export contracts, they couldn't fulfill that because a lot of their produce got damaged. But one thing that I want to ask, more especially Kanse and Lou, what does it look like in terms of, because Lou, you said that you're involved with Abelusi and I've met some Kelo and he's running an amazing program and an amazing initiative. What are the next steps in looking to assist commercial farmers or smallholder farmers getting to that commercial level? And is there any initiatives that we can get involved in? Because if you want to go far, go together. That's always the statement.
Thank you so much, Tamsin. Lunati, just your take on that. And I think that's one thing that maybe we can also just get our economists to comment on, what impact this severe weather conditions had on specifically, like you mentioned, smallholder farmers. Over this time, you specifically highlighting some farmers that were affected where you buy from, that you could not get that supply from. So how has that now affected them going into the new year? Lunati, just your comments, and Tabila, I know you also wanted to share something. Thanks.
I think I'm just going to comment on the role that agri-tech can play in terms of ameliorating a lot of the pressure points that farmers are currently experiencing. And I think we know from anecdotes and from numerous studies that have been done around this topic that one of the biggest impediments to the progress of smallholder and emerging farmers is really around the idea of producing to achieve broad commercialization. And I'm probably not articulating this intelligently, but what I'm trying to say is that one of the biggest problems farmers have is that they fail to utilize the vast wealth of data that they're sitting on. We know that you generate data the moment you step into your farm, and that data has a potential to inform a lot of your decisions. And what we're seeing is that a lot of farmers are not utilizing their data to their benefit. The wonderful thing about data and monitoring your data, and obviously record keeping that feeds into that, is that it enables you to pick up any deviations in your farm in real time and then consult your data repository in order to determine the cause of such deviations and obviously prevent you from incurring catastrophe. What we've done with the Abelusi is that, in essence, one of the things we seek to achieve, or one of the objectives we seek to achieve, is essentially getting farmers to a point where they rely on their data for all of their farming operational decisions, and anchoring decisions relating to type of crop to farm, anchoring decisions relating to the number of employees to have on the farm, anchoring decisions insofar as which specific livestock units to breed, etc. Anchoring all of that to data and starting the numbers, and hopefully through Abelusi will do a lot of the heavy lifting, but looking at numbers and relying on them to basically give you all of those insights. In essence, what that does is that over time, you will begin to see a steady shift in your operations. You begin to see that your resource use now becomes more and more optimized. You begin to see where you're bleeding money and resources, and where you should perhaps, strategically and more intelligently allocate resources in order to get a higher return on your investments. And so I think the value of agri-tech solutions, and not just Abelusi and other agri-tech solutions, is that they enable you to achieve all of those things. And just to speak on what you said earlier on about farmers whose crops was devastated by hail. Besides hail, we've had a ton of other issues, including infectious viruses that have infected crops and stuff. And so how an agri-tech solution will help farmers in a situation like that is that it will, as I said, in essence, help you in anchoring your decisions on what is realistically feasible within the environment in which you operate, and how much you should invest in a certain crop given that insight. And so you're less likely to pump money into something that's prone to, or you're less likely to invest in something that's prone to, such environmental pressures, or something that's prone to be destroyed by something like hail, right? Of course, I think 80% of crops will be destroyed by hail. But I think when you anchor your decisions on one data, not only farm data, but external data as well, you're able to avoid a lot of the losses that you will incur. And so I think it's a conversation that I think we also need to start having. And I say we, I'm including you, Tamsin, as well, because you're a consultant, right? Although you are in the food safety space, but I think it's also worth preaching to farmers that they need to lean more and more towards data to inform their day-to-day operational decisions.
Sounds like another space to me. How to keep good records and keep the data that you need, make it available. And that's definitely something that I think we can sort of elaborate on as we go on and have a conversation on it by itself, Lunati. So thank you so much for highlighting that. Nomzi, would you like to ask a question, share a comment? Would you like to contribute?
Hi, Dawn. Thank you. I would just like to share a comment, actually listening to the conversation. I think another aspect that we need to look at when we look at the trends for 2023 is the consumer buying power, because a lot goes into being a farmer as well, is actually having to scan your market environment, especially if you're a farmer that also exports. If you look at high value crops such as your citrus, your mangoes, your lychees, your fruit industry, some vegetables as well, especially looking at the impact of the Ukrainian and the Russian war, and that we are now going to head into a global recession. It is going to be crucial for farmers now actually to do market scanning and to look at their market access before actually trying to plan the year ahead. Because it has also been reports now that in the EU, most of consumers, they're going to restrict themselves into what they can and cannot buy, because now all that is happening in the EU, and with the gas shortages, money is tight. And also in our country as well, money is tight. So a lot of consumers are now being wary about what they are buying. So I think it would be cognizant for farmers to actually take that into consideration going into the year as well. Doing that market research will actually assist a lot of farmers, because just to make an example, in the citrus industry, there was just now a report by the CEO that a lot of people got paid. The exporters got paid, freight companies got paid, but only 1 in 5 farmers actually got a return. A lot of farmers in this year are actually going to struggle to actually pick up pace starting the season, because they have no capital actually to start up. And we might actually be losing farmers, especially black farmers in the sector. So market scanning is also going to be quite crucial going into the 2023 season.
Thank you so much, Nomzi, and such a vital point. Thank you so much for sharing that. Tabile, we have maybe 5 more minutes left. Maybe just a comment. I want everyone also just to comment on Nomzi's point. Thank you so much, Nomzi.
So I wanted to just comment on a number of things, but I don't think I'm going to have enough time to do that. But first, I wanted just to raise the point that the recent speaker just mentioned. The world is currently going through some serious issues with the economies. So as much as, we can be looking into the issues of exporting, products and all that, the countries that we are exporting to, they are having a lot of shifts. Recently, I just seen from the European Union that there's a lot of money that is being pumped into farmers just to support them because they are not doing very well because of the economies within the respective countries in the European Union in general. Even in North America, there's a lot of money that the feds are pumping into a number of institutions and departments just to ensure that farmers are keeping afloat. So generally, the world is just going through some issues. Here in South Africa, domestically, I've seen today that there's also a minimum wage has been increased. So that again, it is going to be an issue for farmers who have to pay farmers, just as the lady just mentioned, that there's going to be issues in terms of being able to continue with their businesses. So the increase in the minimum wage of 8%, it is going to be injected into what the farmers are going to be making. I mean, we have inflation that is just going crazy all over the world. Those are things that are actually forcing some big shifts in general from other, in food consumption in general. That's why, for example, if you are looking into the poultry industry, now the demand is just going crazy. And what is pushing that is that the high-income countries now are buying more of poultry, which is generally something that you'll find in developing or less developed countries or countries that are in the lower or middle-income countries. So there's a lot of those shifts. Something that I can say also around the issues of citrus industry, if one is following it to the processing part of it, it is just tumbling down globally. I've seen a number of issues that are going on. This is happening since 2020. And I think, of course, it has to do with the COVID issue and the countries being, trying to get into their feet and everything. So it is not going very well. And this is something that I think we're going to have to, everyone in terms of sharing information and, of course, for farmers to make sure that they are making informed decisions in terms of what they are producing at what time or which market is it going to be able to absorb that. The same thing is for avocado, I can say. Avocado is going crazy in terms of the supply. What is going to happen in the next 5 to 10 years, we don't know. But if one is to look into that at an eye that is scanning everything that is happening from my end, is that the citrus industry that we have seen growing rapidly over the years, there's going to be probably a decline in it. And that has to do with what the market is asking for at the moment. And of course, remember, our biggest market, it is the European Union with the citrus. We haven't managed to get into the Asian market yet. Hopefully we will. But of course, we're going to have a competition there. The same European Union that we are exporting into, that they're having issues now, it is also going to be another problem. So in a nutshell, I would say that as much as South Africa is doing pretty well, in fact, I was surprised to look into the data that we normally have for Russia as a country. A lot of analysts have expected to see a drastic decline in what we are selling in that country. To my surprise, and other economists that I've been, in touch with, where the country is doing pretty well there, especially even for citrus, something that a lot of us were not expecting. I think also for the wine industry, we're probably going to see the same thing. As much as we are expecting a little lesser of our production this year, I think next week, we will see another, estimate within the wine industry or table production and everything. So it is going to be an important thing to look into. But hopefully things are not going to get better. But I think as South Africa as a country, we are doing well, or not well, okay, compared to other countries. Even if you have to look into the inflation part of things, we're not doing very bad. We have countries that are having inflation that is around or even above 200, which is regional crazy if you have to compare to other countries. So as a country, South Africa is not doing well, but it can be, a bit better than other countries. And that's something I think we should be proud of, because somehow it's going to support farmers. Look, for instance, for the cases of Thompson has mentioned, the issues of frost and everything. Look at the cabbage now. Cabbage and onion crops that's going to December. A few weeks ago, I just checked, we have about 50% higher prices of what was happening the previous year. And that has to do with exactly what Thompson was saying, that we have a bit of issues with that. And yesterday and today I've talked to a couple of retailers as well, where they are saying that they are having serious issues in accessing cabbage and onions. So those are kind of things that farmers normally have to do. But of course, it has to go to do with what I was saying in Lunat earlier on, that there's been an issue of information that needs to be shared. Because there are some farmers that have excess surplus of that, but generally not doing very well with those.
Thank you so much, Tabile. And I know that you prepare well for these sessions and you always, have so much value to add and contribute to the conversation. I think I'm going to, ask everyone just to wrap up. And I'm going to start with Tapelo because he also didn't have a lot of time to contribute to the conversation tonight. Tapelo, maybe just your last and final comments. And I know that I specifically wanted to ask you to talk or touch on how farmers can still navigate, the rising price of fertilizers and fertilizer costs being high and having to now use more chemicals and sort of navigating the weather conditions that are not normal during this time. Thanks.
On the issue of fertilizers, the obvious case that we now should be looking at or maybe shifting to is to try find alternatives on the organic fertilizer stuff. How can we farm more sustainably using less and less chemicals? That's one on fertilizer side. And that's the only way I believe that we can help farmers to reduce the cost of inputs. Then secondly, on the issue of weather, the bad weather, the weather conditions that we all experiencing now, part of the project that I'm currently working on with the government of Lesotho and one that we'll be working on with Agri SA will be on mitigation. It's climate mitigation in agriculture. So it will be on finding ways on how we can bring on more sustainable ways on how we can mitigate climate change within agriculture. And I've heard Lou sharing some insights on how we can add technology within that. So it's something that I'm looking at. So maybe we can link up with Lou after this session as well. So the other thing that I'm currently looking at that is very interesting now when we look into agriculture and the challenge of climate change is how can we help farmers switch to regenerative agriculture where they can now earn carbon credits instead of selling yields, they can sell carbon credits from their farms. So it's one of the things that we currently trying to find mechanisms on how it can be measured, how it can be sold to big corporates, and how can we ensure that most smallholder farmers can be involved in such programs. So we'll see how everything goes as the year is just beginning.
Thanks, Tapelo. And it's something that we had spoken about briefly last year. And I think there's definitely opportunity to highlight this, create more content for the specific platform. So that's definitely something that I want to touch on, and I'll invite you back for that session. Lou, Conce, I think you're the only other speakers that we hear from the beginning. Maybe just your last and final comments. And then if one of you can just talk about briefly, how the drop in the petrol price will also change the game for farmers, looking towards the new year. Hopefully it stays there. Lou, I'm going to ask you to share your insights first. Thanks.
I think I'm just going to piggyback off what Nomzi has said. I think she raised a very important point. I think when all is said and done, there is no better indicator of trends than what the market is telling you. It's critically important for farmers to heed market signals, or as I like to call it, to read the room, to read the macroeconomic room that is. The harsh reality is that the South African consumer is increasingly squeezed, and we've been under the hammer with incredibly high interest rates, sharply rising inflation, and the unemployment rate that really hasn't nudged from pandemic levels. It's critically important for farmers to readjust their production, to readjust their diversification to other agricultural commodities along those lines. In other words, it's very important for farmers to actually look at what's happening in the market and look at very important indicators such as consumption expenditure, which has declined, I think, in the last quarter by 0.3%, and look at other indicators like consumer spending, which has also declined by 1.2% over the past year, right? And so what does that mean for an emerging farmer? What does it mean for your production choices? What does it mean for the market you choose to pursue? I think those are all questions that you kind of need to ask yourself and then tailor your farm operations to meet them. And so to go back to your last question, petrol price drop, what effect it will have on farmers. In my personal opinion, and please do take this with a grain of salt, it is my personal opinion. In my personal opinion, I don't think it will have that significant impact. I don't think it will alleviate anything at all, to be honest with you, because everything else is still very much high. Inflation is still very much excessive. Price of food, feed, and all the critical inputs that go into agricultural production are still, excessively high. And so I think whatever price drop we experience today will be offset by all of those factors. And so I know it's not promising. Sorry, it's not a very warm note to leave us off on, but it is nonetheless the reality we find ourselves in. South Africa is a very, very tough environment to operate in. Agriculture has always been a very volatile industry, but I think the conditions under which South African farmers operate make that excessive intense. And so I think, again, I would advise farmers to lean on technological platforms that will save them money, save them resources, and increase the probability of them actually fetching a higher price in the market. And so I think the most important thing that farmers should really consider going into the new year is basically signing up to agri-tech platforms, consulting more experts in terms of how they should move and how they should navigate these truly volatile times.
Thanks, Lunati. I think everyone in this space realizes that agriculture is not sunshine and roses. As sexy as it looks on Twitter, it's not like that in real life. So no, it's fine. Thank you so much for making that clear and for sharing your comments on that. Conse, your final comments as we wrap up. Thanks.
Also, just to piggyback on what Nomzi and Lou has just said, this is just my key drivers that I want to leave the space with that will be shaping how we'll be, doing business and what Agri is going to be impacted by in 2023. And as Nomzi has mentioned, our world GDP is expected to grow at like 1.4% slower than what was previously expected. We have China that still maintains its zero COVID policy, and we know the big impact that has on global dynamics. We've got worldwide spillovers from the ongoing war, which includes our high commodity prices. We also have these rapid gains in energy costs, as well as the accelerated inflation to keep in mind. The cost of living in many parts of the world is really under pressure. We've got consumer confidence in developed world that has weakened. And then our food security concerns in the poorer countries have now also exacerbated. We've got elevated inflation, which will definitely complicate most of the trade-offs by the central banks to balance inflationary risk. Just looking at the US in particular has forced to hike, the interest rates aggressively, which also impacted how South Africa has also increased their interest rates, affecting the consumers at the end. We have a higher risk of recession being flagged for the US, the Eurozone, and the UK. And the prospects for China's growth has been so weak in years. And it's basically signals that many cost drivers have peaked and production and consumption will necessarily not go the way we want them to go. And in South Africa, our consumer spending will remain under pressure in 2023. We have all these downside risks, right? We've got a less supportive and local global growth. We've got the rising domestic inflation. We've got higher borrowing costs. There's this risk of the sustained power cuts and rationing, and then the inflation, which remains high. And then, the pressure of the spending power on the consumer, as well as our weaker rand. But like Lou also mentioned, not to be all doom and gloom. South Africans, we are a resilient nation, and our producers do work overtime to make sure that we do have enough food. So in terms of food security, we do remain one of Africa's most food secure countries. And in terms of the diesel and the fuel costs, also echoing Lou's comment, the cost was still high at the most critical part when we needed the fuel. So most of the costs have already been incurred by our producers. So yes, it might have gone down today and, we hope it will stay that way. But like he said, a lot of things are happening currently that is offsetting that little win, but it is a relief at the end of the day. And I'm looking forward to see what the producers are going to do during the season, where the prospects are looking better. So I don't want to leave the space on doom and gloom. South Africa producers are really one of a kind. So also leveraging on AgTech, as Lou has mentioned, I've had the pleasure of interviewing both Kula and Kuronga. And those are AgTech startups that are linking our smallholder farmers to markets. So when you're a smallholder farmer and you do not have access to market, that is where you need to be to take leverage of that so that you also have, price negotiation room. You can find markets you wouldn't necessarily be able to find on your own. So do sign up to those startups and make use of shared economy.
Thank you so much, Conse. And I'd also just like to say people should also follow you guys because you guys are doing amazing work. Food for Thought, that's Conse and Karabo, guys. The Agri Duo doing amazing work, showing insights as well. So thank you so much. I'll always invite you back to these spaces and to join the conversation. So thanks, Conse. Thank you so much for everyone who joined and listened to the conversation this evening on #GatherToGrow. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for sharing your insights. Thank you for listening. And I'll see you back again next week. From me for now, goodbye and have a great rest of the evening. Bye-bye.